Hello and welcome to Wake Up.
It's time to wake up, the Sonia Poulton.
Good morning, Grand Rising. It's Friday the 13th of March. Unlucky for some, but not for us, kids. It's 9:01 a.m. GMT. Welcome to our Friday show, Wake Up Investigates, where I dive deep on a matter of public interest. And today's topic, you're not going to get more of an issue that is a matter of public interest than C19. COVID-19, welcome to the show that knows a psychological operation when it sees one. Over the next hour or so, I may trigger some people as they recall the horrors that have been visited on us. But as we approach the 6th year anniversary of COVID-19, I thought it imperative for me to reflect on it for my viewers, because the most important thing next to accountability is that we do not forget what they have done to us and our loved ones. Some people say, never forget, never forgive. That's entirely down to you. But certainly we cannot afford to forget, because if we forget, we are forced to repeat it, and we cannot allow that to happen ever. People, we have been abused for so long and so effectively that millions of us, even billions, do not realize we were abused. And as I say, as we approach the 6th anniversary since lockdown in the UK, I went back through my files to be reminded of what we have endured. And I thought that we should do a Never Forget C19 special. I want to talk today about the role of government and ministers, the complicity of famous people, the propaganda, the attack on sick and disabled, the mRNA, clapping for the NHS, neighbourhood snitches, dancing medics, the transference of wealth, various agendas, and how the whole thing was foisted upon us on a lie. Never forget. From the outset, I have to be absolutely clear here. Broadcasting this subject on YouTube, which is my viewers' preferred way of watching Wake Up, is problematic. YouTube was fully involved in the C19 narrative. Yes, indeed, it was. Indeed, it was. It was led by this lady, Susan Wojcicki. She sadly died on August the 9th, 2024, at the age of 56. Following a 2-year battle with non-small cell lung cancer. She was diagnosed with the disease in 2022. And although YouTube have now altered its restrictive medical misinformation policy, we are still not out of the woods in what I can say today. Consequently, I have spent an inordinate amount of time working out how to do what I'm doing today, that I create a record from my perspective of what was done to us during C19. Yes, indeed, during C19. And particularly when it comes to the mRNA jab insertion, however you see it. Today's show was partly inspired because I kept seeing mention of it on my social media platforms. You see, the problem is the shadow that C19 created over humanity is one of the scariest aspects of it. That's what I call long COVID, personally, in that the impact it has had on us has been incalculable. We are still in psychological recovery. Some people can never recover, either because the impact was too great or because they left this earth during this time. This was an attack on every area of us, personally, physically, psychologically. They forced us to be separated from our loved ones. My brother died during lockdown in 2020. And at the funeral, we had to sit apart in single chairs. The inhumanity the parasite controllers demonstrated towards us all is off the scale. I will never forget, ever. The lies of C19 are endless because the central story is built on a lie. The involvement of my journalistic profession was obscene. It could not have worked without media complicity. I think the meme that says it all is, if you ever wondered how you would have reacted in Nazi Germany or any similar atrocity, now you know. Yes, indeed. Now, indeed, you know. And we saw them, didn't we? What we saw during C19, many of us cannot ever erase. And as I say, we cannot afford to. There are some people I simply will not forgive, because when I forgive, I tend to forget. And there are still people walking around who should be imprisoned and more. C19 would not have been possible without compliance, subservience, and complicity. I lost respect for so many people. And in today's report, although I am referring mostly to the UK when it comes to the specifics of what was done, this was pretty much carried out all over the world and in lockstep. So what we experienced in the UK is probably what you experienced too. And when it comes to people from Israel, Canada, and the US, like the UK with bells on, please note, I don't pretend that this is a complete account of what has been done to us. These are my recollections and thoughts with my imagery, my footage. I think we will be unpacking the impact for decades, if not centuries, when people look back at us with sympathy, disdain, and horror at the stupidity that we allowed. I was ill throughout almost all of 2020. I had surgery in a southwest London hospital, and I was extremely sick. Whatever happened to me there made me very sick for almost all of 2020, but it wasn't COVID. In hospital, I projectile vomited, I fainted, and I was sick for months, and I never knew what it was. The doctors could not diagnose it. They didn't know what had happened to me in hospital. And because of the restrictions I've mentioned, obviously this will not deal with the issue as such of a virus, whether real or not. And I would also like to say, for the avoidance of doubt, me personally, I was anti-V 30 years before it was fashionable to be so. Just saying, just saying. So you know where I'm coming from. And even though the UK is a nation, devolution allowed the UK's 4 nations to each have their own responses, with the Scottish government, the Welsh government, and the Northern Ireland executive introducing different policies for their respective territories. Numerous laws were enacted or introduced throughout C19. And there has been some disparity between the outbreaks that we were told in England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Healthcare in the UK is also devolved, each constituent country having its own publicly funded healthcare system run by devolved governments. And so, again, much of what I'm referring to will either be about the UK or it will be about England. But the same that applies to the UK, as I say, applies all over the world. C19, as said, was a lockstep program largely across the globe. A large number of global leaders and international figures supported the coordinated response to C19, primarily by advocating for a new international pandemic treaty to manage future health crisis. In March 2021, a coalition of over 20 world leaders alongside the World Health Organization called for a treaty to strengthen pandemic preparedness, aiming, they said, to improve global alert systems, data sharing, and research. Key people involved: Emmanuel Macron from France, Angela Merkel from Germany, Boris Johnson, the UK, Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand, Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine, Donald Trump from the US, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission. Oh, there's just so many. They were all pretty much involved. Italy, Norway, Netherlands, Spain, Erna Solberg from Norway, Joko Widodo from Indonesia, Moon Jae-in from South Korea. Oh, it went on. It truly went on. Keith Rowley from Trinidad and Tobago. And then, of course, there were people like the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, and Bill Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And there were a number of people who were praised for their very swift early pandemic action. And one of them was Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand. She was noted very early for her effective response. She was absolutely strident. To our New Zealand viewers, I'm with you, people. I'm with you. She was a harridan. Oh, don't forget Humphrey. I will definitely get to the TV doctors. Don't you worry about that. So as you can see, this was a worldwide initiative and they all bought into it. So they are all responsible, all those names I've mentioned and more. And we cannot forget, even though they say this has nothing to do with it. But this took place just months before C19 was visited on the world. Known globalist shills had financed the tabletop pandemic exercise, Event 201. I was going to call it 2001. Event 201 took place on October the 18th, 2019 in New York. It was hosted by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It simulated a fictional novel coronavirus outbreak to prepare global leaders for pandemic response. That was what we were told. The purpose was to illustrate the pandemic preparedness efforts needed to diminish the large-scale economic and societal consequences of a severe pandemic. The scenario was a fictional zoonotic coronavirus, which was transmitted from bats to pigs to people, which eventually becomes efficiently transmissible from person to person. The simulation highlighted the need, we were told, for public-private cooperation in pandemic response, which is absolutely the whole thing of the World Economic Forum and their stakeholder capitalism. And the participants were leaders in global business, government, and public health. And they are very keen to stress to us that it's important to note that Event 201 was a simulation and not a prediction. That's what they told us. And it's also important to note, by the way, that Johns Hopkins has long had links to the CIA and the US intelligence community. So make of that what you want. And before it exploded onto the world stage, of course, we were subject to horrendous images from China. People were dropping in the streets. We were told body bags were piling up. The heat was on and the story was being ramped up. And about 13 days before lockdown, I tweeted, could people just kind of like calm down? Because otherwise the powers that be would have us doing all manner of things. Of course, my advice went unheeded, but I tell you that just to let you know from the outset, I knew it stunk. Absolutely stunk. And of course, similar outcomes were reported from Italy, where hospitals, we were told, were overflowing. And it created this incredibly scary dystopia where it seemed that wherever you were in the world, you could catch this thing that was knocking people out in the street. That's what we were fed. It was huge. It was massive. And even so-called alternative people jumped in on it. And in the UK, we were told that C19 was present by the end of January 2020, with the first confirmed deaths in March 2020. We were told it was so bad in the UK that over 1,000 lineages of SARS-CoV-2, its official name, entered the UK in the early 2020 from international travelers, mostly from outbreaks elsewhere in Europe, leading, we were told, to numerous clusters that overwhelmed contact tracing efforts. And yet, somehow, they still continued to let travelers into the UK. And that didn't make much sense from the start, and neither was it supposed to. Much of what we have experienced during C19 beggared belief. Wait until I get to some of the rules that they visited upon us. Some of they would be farcical if they weren't so scary. So let me be very clear here, and that is, even though there are big hands at play here, okay? Absolute big hands. This is a global agenda, lockstep, remember. But there are still people in each country who must be held to account, because they are the people who were prepared to put their faces on the jars of COVID-19. And in the UK, this was one of them. Boris multiple kids that I can't even remember. Johnson, Prime Minister, he announced the first national lockdown on the 23rd of March, 2020. And Parliament introduced the Coronavirus Act 2020 2 days later, which granted the devolved governments emergency powers and empowered the police to enforce public health measures. Lockdown happened on a lie, as C19 had already been downgraded from its classification as a high consequence infectious disease on 19th of March 2020 by the Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens and the 4 nations public health bodies, after it was initially classified as a high consequence infectious disease on the 16th of January 2020. So for anybody at the back there, or anybody who's not aware, or anybody who's hard of hearing, I'm just going to repeat that. And that is, there was no need for lockdown, because 4 days before Boris Johnson announced a UK-wide lockdown, COVID-19, coronavirus, had been downgraded. That is a fact. And it had been downgraded from a high consequence infectious disease because it simply did not fit the criteria of an HCID. And the reasons included, this was according to the government's own records and the FOIs and the information that I submitted afterwards. And that is, they said it was downgraded because coronavirus had a low mortality rate. Data indicated that the overall mortality rate was lower than initially feared. That is a reality. And an HCID in the UK is defined as an acute infectious disease, typically with a high case fatality rate that may not have effective treatments and is difficult to detect rapidly. Well, they were detecting it like nobody's business, and we know why, and we'll get to that. But I had a conversation with a representative of NHS England. I recorded him. I still have it. I'm only not going to play it because I may well get into trouble in terms of data issues. But I can tell you that I contacted him 3 days after Boris Johnson had announced these measures. And what he said to me was very clear. First of all, he said that it had been downgraded because C19 was not airborne. Yet they told us C19 was an airborne disease, remember? But behind the scenes, and I have that. And if I ever have to play it, I have it. But you can take it from me that that was what he said. And if you look back on these last 6 years and not see how we were kind of mass coerced, betrayed, lied to, threatened, and had our lives turned upside down for a lie, then I have to inform you, you are the problem. C19 was an intelligence test and many failed it. Compliance is a trap that people ran towards. The question is, are they still falling for it? So it was that Boris Johnson issued this incredibly totalitarian stay-at-home order or lockdown, introduced on the 23rd of March, based on a lie, banning all non-essential travel and contact with other people, shut schools, businesses, venues, and places where people gathered. People were told to keep apart in public. Those with symptoms and their households were told to self-isolate, while those considered at highest risk were told to shield. This was the moment that I began to see some people reveled in this new victimhood status. I remember there was a woman in the street. She'd always been a bit weird and a bit like overly weird about her children, overly protective. And I have nothing wrong with parents being protective. I've always been protective of my child, but this is on another level. Well, within an hour or so of Boris Johnson's announcement, there were signs all on her door. Do not come here. We are shielded. And I was like, you couldn't wait for this moment, could you, love? There were loads of people like that, weird, ridiculous people. And we were also told, by the way, that the UK's overall death toll surpassed that of Italy on the 3rd of May. 3rd of May, incidentally, because you know I quite like interesting dates. 3rd of May was the date that the world's most famous missing child was reported missing. Yes, indeed, Madeleine McCann. So just like those kind of think it's interesting. I think dates are interesting when it comes to world events. Anyway, by mid-April, it was reported that restrictions had flattened the curve. Remember, they told us only 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And the UK, we were told, had passed its peak. But then we were told that the UK's total death toll surpassed that of even Italy. Remember the horror scenes that we'd had from Italy. And over the year, restrictions were sort of steadily eased across the UK in late spring and early summer that year, and then ramped up again over the next period. And also important to note that the UK's, what we were told, epidemic in early 2020 was at the time one of the largest worldwide. Maybe that explains why the UK was the test bed for the mRNA jab. And that was said to me by Hedley Rees, who I interviewed on numerous occasions, brilliant, outspoken whistleblower involved in the pharmaceutical supply chain. And he said categorically the UK had been used as a test bed for the mRNA technology. And suddenly, overnight, the world went quiet. Really weird. It was so eerie, right? And I took loads of footage, as you can imagine that I would. And this was me on a bus journey along what is normally an absolutely packed street where I live. I live in Teddington, southwest Greater London, and this was like mid-morning, and it is normally packed, and the bus is normally packed. Anyway, this is my journey. I captured this. Here they are, social distancing. Look at that, waiting to get into the post office. They're all social distancing, and there he is waiting outside. Empty. This is why small businesses have been killed off over the last 6 years. Look at them, they're all shut. They're not allowed to open, and a lot of them are no longer there. Those two aren't there. They've gone. It's zombie town. Absolutely awful stuff. Awful stuff. And people are in the comments talking about how they still feel rage. Yes, we should be absolutely raging. It's worse than being invaded, lenticular. Yes, absolute nightmare. And yes, Humphrey, people are pathetic and lined up. Good old Teddington. Teddington is beautiful and wonderful, but I was absolutely surrounded by compliant people. I remember a neighbor falling out with me because he said it was down to people like me that diseases spread because I wouldn't wear a mask, as one example. But I just wanted to show you that because it was so eerie, wasn't it? And you know what was interesting, of course, about Boris Johnson? Do you remember this? And hopefully I will prick many memories today, but just days after he enforced the most draconian measures on our fair land, we were told he had COVID. And we were also told he was at death's door. Do you remember all that? We were told that he first tested for C19 on the 27th of March, so 4 days after he brought in those measures. And we were told he was self-isolating in Downing Street. On the 5th of April, we were told, and I use the expression we were told because I wasn't there and I don't know. So we were told that he was admitted to St. Thomas's Hospital in London as a precautionary step after 10 days of persistent symptoms. We were told on the 6th of April that he was moved to intensive care after his condition worsened. How interesting that the Prime Minister appears to have the extreme of the thing that they are pushing. How very interesting. And we were told that he remained in intensive care for 3 nights, received oxygen treatment, though he was not put on a ventilator, which he probably should have been very happy about, given what happened to many who were. On the 9th of April, he moved back to a general ward. And on the 12th of April, we were told he was discharged from the hospital to continue his recovery at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country retreat. And then again in November 2020, we were told that he was self-isolating again after coming into contact with an MP who tested positive. And again in July 2021, he entered another period of self-isolation after being identified as a close contact of then Health Secretary Sajid Javid. Or he was certainly involved in health anyway. It was Matt Hancock who was the health secretary throughout C19. And so how interesting that the head of the snake, because it is the head of the snake. Look, again, he's not he's not in charge, okay? I don't pretend for a second that Boris Johnson was in charge, but he was the one who was prepared to be at the head of it and, be the face of it. So absolutely, this is one person who must be held accountable, And the Coronavirus Act 2020 enabled lockdown. I think I've got a video here of it, and I'm probably talking over it. Let's have a look. Here it is. This is the Coronavirus Act 2020. In 30 years of journalism, I've never known such a shocking piece of legislation. So the sponsor is Matt Hancock from the Department for Health and Social Care. Of course, he's our health secretary. If you just look at this is the speed. It went through all of its stages in one day.
Look at that.
From the first sitting to royal assent. This is the act itself. Now, important to note what I just said there. Look at the speed of this. They quite literally put an entire new law through on the same day, from Parliament to royal assent. Yes, Queenie gave her royal assent to the Coronavirus Act, and that enabled the government to have extraordinary powers. It granted the UK government, devolved administrations and public bodies extensive emergency powers to, they say, respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Their words, not mine. Now, there were so many key powers granted in the Coronavirus Act. It makes me want to vomit even recalling them. Things like, so there was emergency registration, which allowed for the temporary registration of retired health professionals, as one example. There was the Mental Health Act modifications, which enabled the detention and treatment of patients with fewer doctor opinions. So you could be sectioned on the say-so of one person, one doctor instead of two. And you need to, for at least have a fail-safe. And they also extended the time limits for mental health detentions. And it reminds me of that very famous expression, which I'm now going to paraphrase very badly. And it's something like, it is no measure of good health it's no measure of good health, something in a sick society. You know the one I mean. And essentially it means we have a sick society. Of course, our mental health should be impacted. Absolutely it should. But what they did in the Coronavirus Act is they allowed people to be sectioned on the say-so of one doctor and for longer. So that was really worrying. They also allowed local authorities to prioritize care for those what they considered the most pressing needs. Now, I went into my doctor's surgery during this period of time because, as I say, I was so sick. The place was empty. It was really weird. I felt like I'd walked into some kind of mad dystopian building. Like there was nobody there. There was separating gates in my doctor's surgery. Normally, it's kind of like quite a cottagey doctor's surgery, and it became this frightening place. It was like a laboratory, really awful. And the doctor greeted me head to toe covered. It was just weird, absolute all weird stuff. And that enabled all of this. And so when they say it allowed local authorities to prioritize care, that meant that people were late being diagnosed, cancer diagnosis, pretty much any diagnosis other than C19. It was top of the priority. And there was a bloody good reason for that. Because it was an agenda, right? It gave police, immigration officers, and public health officials powers to detain, screen, and isolate individuals suspected of being infected with SARS-CoV-2. That was the Coronavirus Act. That's what it did. It enabled ministers to restrict and prohibit events and gatherings, although not for them, and to close premises, including businesses, they said, to reduce transmission. These ministers are responsible for so much, including destroying small local businesses. It gave power to ministers to direct the temporary closure of educational institutions and childcare premises, including primary and secondary schools. It expanded the use of video and audio technology for court hearings and tribunal proceedings. And I attended a court hearing during that time, which was online. It postponed local, mayoral and police and crime commissioner elections, which was scheduled for May 2020. It was postponed until 2021. And it also removed the requirement for a jury in inquests. This is key, where a death was suspected to be caused by COVID-19. I will repeat that, because this is key. It removed the requirements for a jury in inquests where a death was suspected to be caused by COVID-19. So that reduces the amount of people who are in on it, right? And there were other issues impacting finances and employment. The act was subject to a 2-year sunset clause, meaning most provisions expired in March 2022, though some were extended or made permanent. And the legislation, which granted emergency powers to the UK government, was essentially withdrawn in October 2023, although fragments of it remain. And the special powers, such as those for enforcing lockdowns or amending regulations rapidly, are no longer active under this specific act. But it enabled such madness, such as cops arresting people for sitting longer on park benches than they were allowed. It was mad stuff. Absolute mad stuff. This was the ultimate in divide and conquer, and well played on behalf of the parasitical controllers. Well played. It was all the measures around the Coronavirus Act that led to the snitchers, my least favorite type of people in the world generally, obviously next to kind of murderers and perps and all that sort of stuff. But snitchers, I hate them. And well, here's a segment of me from Russia Today, now sadly closed down during all the nonsense to do with Ukraine. But this Russia Today closed down by Boris Johnson's government. And here's a segment of me talking about what was happening in terms of the snitchers. An undercurrent that accompanies this. I mean, it's sort of positioned and framed as you are doing your civic duty, you are protecting everybody, but it has deeper ramifications. Oh, is that just stopped? It does have deeper ramifications, and what it does, obviously, is it divided us nicely. And there was an absolute significant rise during this period in people reporting snitching on their neighbours and fellow citizens for breaking lockdown rules, quarantine requirements and social distancing guidelines. And it was absolutely mad. They made me sick. There were people online were like, I was in the supermarket today and this person had this amount of stuff in their basket and they weren't supposed to. And I noted that my neighbor went out for longer, blah, blah, blah. And again, if you wonder what you would have been like during Nazi Germany or any similar atrocity, now you know, and I know what I would have been like. And that is I would have refused to comply because I did. Absolutely. And I think that's a good indicator of who we are. As I say, this was an intelligence test, but it was also about compliance as well. And snitching was worldwide. It was happening all over. It wasn't just the UK. But in the UK, for example, police received nearly 200,000 calls reporting alleged breaches of coronavirus regulations in the first month of the lockdown. For goodness sake, you people are pathetic. If you were a snitch, I think you're pathetic, right? There were snitch lines. Several jurisdictions and local authorities set up specific dedicated hotlines or web portals for the public to report violations. And these reports, as I say, often involve neighbors, just kind of getting together with one person more or whatever. And you know what it was this has happened before. Obviously, there have been snitches in every kind of atrocity. And this was an atrocity. Absolutely, it was. But I did this video, right? So in Christmas 2020, a neighbor had arranged for a friend to come and entertain us. We're still in lockdown. And a neighbor had arranged for a friend to come and entertain us on the street corner to lift the mood. We were going to all about, even though we thought the whole thing was, some of us thought the whole thing was bunkum, but we said, yeah, that's a really good idea. Let him come along, lift the mood. And this is what happened. The bloody police came. Here you go. And you can hear me, what I have to say about it. Although I have to say, I have edited out the first part where I'm walking towards the police with my daughter and my dog. And I say probably quite loudly, what is this BS? The guy is called Dart and he came out free of charge just to entertain people and be on the street corner. This is what happened. What the hell? Oh, these videos are messing up. I'm going to bring that one back in because I am definitely going to play that. And forgive me, people, this sometimes happens on StreamYard. It's not fantastically reliable if you've already pre-programmed in videos, but we are going to play this. Oh, yes, we are. Let me do it now. Here we go. Let's try it again. Right. What the hell?
That is basically a gathering which you can find on £10,000. So just, I know you haven't,
I'm not attracting a crowd.
I'm just giving you some sort of advice. If it does happen, some officers will go back.
Yeah, but this is people on this.
Fair enough.
This is people on this street. So it wasn't like
Yeah, fair enough. Like I stated, I know your morals are for the greater good and also just for everything. However,
What is the problem?
problem is we're in a tier 4, madam,
Yes.
and no one should be out.
What, even on a street corner?
No.
Socially distancing?
No, because if you've had a look at the government's website,
Yeah.
it states that nobody should be outside.
I'm a journalist,
Okay, that's
and
fine.
I have looked at the government website, but what I'm also aware of is Cressida Dick said no cops will be haranguing anybody who's socialising. Are you
also
aware
what
of
the government
that?
has stated is that we're in a tier 4 lockdown
Yeah,
from
but
Sunday.
your boss of the Metropolitan Police, she's
Yeah.
very clear. There'll be no knocking on doors. There'll be no
We haven't
haranguing
knocked on the
people.
door. We've had a call here today stating that there's a street party going on.
What a pity that
well-
people are just like that.
So,
Dart,
like I said,
thank you so much for coming out.
You're welcome.
I would like to just give you that
thank you so much.
as a token. Thank you so much. Whoops.
Sorry, Green.
Unbelievable. What kind of killjoy would do this? And so, yeah, snitches everywhere. I was well ticked off. And as I pointed out to him, his own boss, Cressida Dick at the time, had said people are not going to be harassed for gathering together. Absolutely ridiculous. Vanessa, I always have to have my say. I'm like that. I'm just like that, Stephen. That's just who I am. I just couldn't bear it. And then obviously I gave Dart some money because the guy had showed up to just kind of make us feel a bit, lift our spirits, make us feel a little bit better. It was awful stuff. And the pushers in England and the UK, but even in like Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as I say, all different people because of devolution, but the English pushers were Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, Matt Hancock, Health Minister. The role of Matt Hancock, I think people will be talking about it in 100 years' time. This was an awful human being, right? He had an affair during lockdown. He was on I'm a Celebrity when he was still a minister. He has still not been brought to justice. Nadeem Sahawi, who was the minister for COVID-19 vaccine deployment, a man who had once used parliamentary expenses to heat his horse stables, and a man who, so there was some connection with a medical company. It was reported that his wife, Lana Saib, had a controlling interest in a newly formed firm called Warren Medical Limited. Zawi defended this by stating the company was intended for a property investment, but it's a medical company. Hello, you what now? And obviously Nadeem Zawi, he co-founded the polling firm YouGov as one example. And he is latterly, he's now moved over to Reform being the political party where loser Tory MPs go to, well, just fall off the end of a cliff for all I care. And but the reality is that Nadeem Zawi was the vaccine minister, and he's now in that kind of anti-establishment party, quote unquote, Reform. Then, of course, there was Chris Whitty, England's chief medical officer. And here's a typical image of they had regular pressers, which is where the press gather together and ask completely irrelevant questions because the press were bought and paid for, and you will see why shortly. So from left to right, that's my left to right, might not be yours, is Chris Whitty, England's chief medical officer. Obviously, Boris Johnson in the middle, and Sir Patrick Vallance. He was the UK government's chief scientific advisor. He played an absolute pivotal role in shaping COVID-19 science policy, advising on the national response and communicating those decisions to the public. He appeared frequently alongside government leaders in briefings, guiding policies based on what we were told was scientific evidence during the pandemic. They always talked about following the science. These people did not follow the science. And then, of course, there was Rishi Sunak, who was the Chancellor at that stage and later became the Prime Minister. And at the time, this is how hopeless and how bought and how captured the press were. They nicknamed him Dishy Rishi. It was so ridiculous. And what about all the ridiculous stuff, right? They told us to isolate, that we were in lockdown. And then they introduced things like because businesses were then clearly failing. And then they introduced things like Eat Out to Help Out. Do you remember that? Absolute ridiculous stuff. And some of the dules were absurd. I'm embarrassed to even repeat them, but I shall. There was, for example, during the tier 2 restriction stated that pubs could only serve alcohol if it was part of a substantial meal. So there was a huge national debate about what was a substantial meal, and did a Scotch egg constitute a substantial meal, and did a Cornish pasty constitute a substantial meal if it was served with a side of chips and salad. I mean, this was just insane, ridiculous stuff. Then there was the linger rule. Remember that? Number 10 initially suggested that drinkers had to leave the pub the minute they finished their last mouthful of food, even if they still had a full pint, right? And then there was this whole thing about high-end crisps. I mean, it's so ridiculous. When I was reminding myself of this yesterday and going through all my C19 files, I was like, I can't believe people went along with this. Shug is in the comments saying I ignored them all. Yes, Shug, because you're a thinker. And that period lacked critical thinkers, but we were not short on compliant sheep. That is the reality. So those high-end crisps, there was one legal instance, for example, where a licensing committee was convinced that high-end crisps served with kind of like elaborate dips could constitute a substantial meal. These people are all idiots. There were other madness. There was no dancing at weddings. Do you remember that? In June 2021, guest lists were limited, but dance floors remained closed. The only exception was for the couple's first dance. There was the whole thing of face mask versus singing. At one point, worshippers in church were required to wear masks, but were legally allowed to remove them specifically to sing. And that didn't make sense because we had these hired globalist scientists like Valance and Whitty saying to us, but oh no, that's how you spread it all. Didn't make any sense. Nothing made sense. It didn't add up because it was never going to make sense. Then there was the rule of 6, which led to so much snitching. It was absolutely disgusting. And that was when they limited gatherings to 6 people. That was introduced by the policing minister, encouraged concerned neighbours to call the police on anyone they saw hosting a 7th person in their garden. Ludicrous stuff. I'm even embarrassed to recount this, that the British people were somehow spineless and incapable of standing up and going to war against all this stuff. There was things like no sitting in parks during the first lockdown in early 2020. You were allowed into parks to exercise, kind of running or walking, but were strictly forbidden from sitting on a bench or to sunbathe. Police famously used drones to shamingly film people walking in remote areas. Do you remember? Awful stuff. Then there was confusion reigning over whether you could drive to a location to walk your dog. Some police forces issued fines to people who drove short distances to find a green space, arguing the exercise should start at their front door. So many people need to be held to account. I'm not even sure we have big enough prisons for all the people who are responsible. And everybody who enacted all this stuff are all responsible. The silent pubs. No wonder pubs have gone to the wall since C19. And the pubs traditionally in the UK, in England, have always been the hub of the community, and they've gone to the wall. They had silent pubs. Pubs were at one point banned from showing exciting TV or playing loud music that might encourage singing or raised voices. Then there was a 10 p.m. curfew that where people had to be home. Thousands of people were forced out of pubs and onto public transport at the exact same time. Again, according to their own rules, it didn't make any sense. None of it made any sense. And then, although I did agree with this, one of the few ones that I did agree, and that was in December 2020, Santa's grottos were allowed to open, but children were legally prohibited from sitting on Santa's knee. So at least one good thing came from it, because that's one thing I've never been comfortable with, the idea of children being stuck on the knee of complete strange men. And I don't care how kind and friendly those Santas look. Cafes also died off, killing off third spaces. Absolutely, they did. And one of the things that I can never, ever, ever forgive them for, and why I believe that these people are responsible for mass deaths, is remember when they removed elderly people from NHS hospitals? Do you remember that during the first wave of C19 in the UK? Policies regarding the discharge of patients from NHS hospitals resulted in many elderly individuals being moved out of hospital, denied access to hospital care. A 2022 High Court ruling found that government policies to discharge untested patients from hospitals into care homes was unlawful. This was the unlawful discharge policy where thousands of elderly patients were discharged from hospitals into care homes. And we were told, Matt Hancock lied, said there was a protected ring around these elderly people. You lied, Hancock, you're a liar. And bear in mind, if this is a man that could lie to his wife and children while having an affair in office, he could lie to the nation, and he did. We know that, absolutely lied. Elderly, vulnerable people were denied hospital access. And there was an absolute misuse of the do not attempt to resuscitate. That, like, this applied all across the board. I remember interviewing one woman during that period, and her father was in an elderly care home. And the thing is, there's so much that we've yet to take account of, and that is the isolation on elderly, vulnerable people, a substantial contributing factor to the deterioration of many people. And there was a substantial death rate. At least over 20,000 elderly or disabled care home residents died between March and June 2020 in England and Wales. Matt Hancock, I hold you responsible. And as I say, I interviewed one woman whose father was in an elderly care home. He was vulnerable. She couldn't go in and visit him. She couldn't do all the things that humans need: human contact, hugs, kisses, love, affection, none of that. And she watched as he was dying. She watched on iPad as he was dying. I interviewed another woman who the same happened with her mum in an elderly care home. I will never forgive these people for what they did to the elderly and vulnerable in our nation, around the world. I will never, ever forgive them. And again, this was repeated all around the world. This was not unique to the UK. They disposed of elderly people. It is an absolute fact that elderly care home deaths increased during C19. There was high excess mortality between mid-March and mid-June. We know that. Total excess deaths for the care home was totaled roughly 18,000, more deaths than the 5-year average. Okay, that's first of all. And there were contributing factors. Oh, yes, indeed. And I can get to them. And these are facts. So YouTube or whoever, these are facts. These are accepted facts now. So at the same time as these elderly people were dying off in their droves, the UK increased its purchasing and use of Midazolam. Now, Midazolam is the drug that is used for sedation, for anesthesia, and in palliative care. This was not a conspiracy theory. This was a fact that the UK significantly increased its purchase and stockpiling of Midazolam during this period. And the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England identified Midazolam as a priority medicine. They said it was for two main reasons. One was for intensive care. It was used as a sedative for patients on ventilators, often as an alternative to other drugs. It was used for end of life care. I'm going to repeat that. It was used for end of life care. We were told it was to manage symptoms like anxiety, agitation, and breathlessness for patients nearing death. There is absolute evidence of increased use and increased demand. In April 2020 alone, out of hospital prescriptions for Midazolam in England jumped to 38,582 compared to a 2019 use of 17,500. That's double at least. And that's only what they're admitting to. So the two are related. It was used absolutely for nefarious purposes. Absolutely. It was problematic. We all knew it. It was disgusting. No accountability, Juliet. And even as I'm going through my research, I'm getting angry. My voice is probably different today than it normally is when I'm doing somewhat lighter topics, because I'm still mad. I'm still angry, and I'm still mad that this was allowed to happen. It should never have been allowed to happen. The fact that we're in danger of it happening again makes me even madder, if there is such a word. And what about those Nightingale hospitals? Can we remember the Nightingale hospitals? We were told they were temporary emergency field hospitals established across England and the wider UK in the spring of 2020. We were told it was to provide surge capacity for the NHS during the first wave of C19. The Nightingale hospitals, named after Florence Nightingale, and there were 7 main hospitals that were set up in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, Harrogate, Washington, and Exeter. They offered thousands of potential beds, but were largely unused for the original purpose. They turned them into vaccine hubs, right? Only the London and Manchester sites treated patients during the first wave. And this is no laughing matter, because those Nightingale hospitals cost us, the beleaguered British taxpayer, in excess of 500 million, and they went largely unused. I would offer that they were never intended as a hospital overflow, and always intended, one, to create panic and fear that there was a lack. Remember, scarcity was a whole big thing. We haven't got enough PPE. We haven't got enough tests. All of it. There were demands. Like, I want to test. I want to test. It made people have this lack scarcity mindset. And the same thing with NHS hospitals. And I will show you footage shortly when I went in at the peak to an empty hospital that people were getting arrested for, by the way. People were videoing empty hospitals and getting arrested and charged. I didn't. Anyway, the Nightingale hospitals, absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous. And actually, as I say, in excess of 500 million, barely used, and absolutely shocking. And they told us, right, that the peak in the UK was between the 12th and 14th of April 2020. And that was when those Nightingale hospitals would be overwhelmed. So as I say, I went into a busy London hospital to find out. And here it is. And I only was able to do a little bit because staff came. But as you can see, this is Kingston Hospital. Kingston Hospital is a very busy hospital. It's Southwest London, Greater London, massively busy hospital. Even from the entrance, you can see there's nobody there. There's literally nobody there. Here we go. I'd had surgery, by the way, so I was walking a bit funny. I'd had surgery on my hip. Look at that. I see 2 staff members ahead of me, which is why I had to stop filming. But I can report to you, as your reporter right here and now, that I went around that hospital and it was essentially empty. And I went in because I was supposed to have a follow-up appointment to my surgery. And when I got there, the woman at the desk said, "Oh, no, it's all been cancelled." The car park was half empty. These staff were just sitting around. And we will get to the TikTok medics. Absolutely, we will. And the NHS, of course, became the sacred cow, didn't it? The same people who had allowed it to be partly privatised and deliberately run down from the Health and Social Care Bill of 2012, I think it was. And it was because they could afford private medicine. They were also telling us to clap for the NHS every Thursday night. Beat pots and pans, right? Remember that. Hands up. The first Thursday, I did it too. I went along with it, but not for any other reason then. coming from a working class background, I really related to the working class people who were still forced to work during all of this. But I did it for, I think I might have even done it for the first two Thursdays. And then I remember I refused to do it for the third one. And one of my neighbours took umbrage with me and wouldn't speak to me for months because I refused to turn up. It was originally called the Clap for Carers. Remember it? Commonly known as the Clap for the NHS. And it officially started on Thursday, the 26th of March. So that was 3 days after enforced lockdown. The initiative, we were told, was created by Anne-Marie Pla, a Dutch woman living in London. She was inspired because she'd said she'd seen similar displays of gratitude in the Netherlands. And it became a weekly occurrence every Thursday at 8 p.m. for 10 sodden consecutive weeks. And it started as a tribute specifically for the NHS staff. It quickly expanded to include all key workers such as care home staff, supermarket workers and delivery drivers. And again, I appreciated all these people. My sister worked in a care home. My sister is no longer with us. She also died during that period, I should say. My sister and my brother, my siblings. And so again, I was out there because coming from the background that I come from, I very much felt these people like care home staff and what they'd been put through and everything. But as far as the NHS was concerned, it has been dismantled. There's no doubt about it at all. They tried it again after that 10-week period. They tried it again in July, which was the 72nd anniversary of the NHS. And they did do that. They did a clapping then. And again, I've always been a supporter of the NHS, but the people who were pushing for it are not. They are people who largely can afford private healthcare and politicians and ministers who have been very much involved in the privatization, 49% privatization of the National Health Service. And then they attempted a revival in January 2021 when they wanted a clap for heroes. Do you remember that? That didn't happen. People were like, I'm not having this now. And it's because by this point, many had caught onto the scam. That's why. And we cannot forget the complicity of medical staff and those who went along with it. They're all complicit. I don't care if they knew they're complicit. There were TV doctors like Dr. Hilary Jones, disgusting human being, who was like, you must wear a mask when you're suing. Do you remember that sort of ridiculous stuff? And then he was caught in his local pharmacy without a mask on. Dr. Sarah Jarvis, these were horrible people. Lies were told, massive lies. Dr. Sarah Keys said on This Morning that once you have the jab, you are 100% effective against coronavirus. And conversely, those who stood up to be counted and said there's something wrong with this narrative were hauled before the regulatory body, and some were even struck off. Dr. Sam White, Dr. David Cartland stood up to be counted. He was recently struck off. They got him in the end. Mr. Mohammed Adil, a Manchester surgeon. I've interviewed all of these people. Dr. Anne McCloskey, a Londonderry GP. She was suspended after expressing concerns on social media about young people taking the C19 jab. Dr. Sarah Myhill, a private doctor in Powys, Wales, suspended for 9 months for posting what they said were false claims regarding C19 treatments online. Good doctors and dentists who stood up. I interviewed many of them: surgeon Tony Hinton, Dr. Claire Craig, Dr. Malcolm McKendrick, Dr. Zach Cox, Dr. Dolores Carhill. And the GMC went after them and cited things like that. These doctors were undermining public health, were promoting misinformation, were being dishonest, all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Kath, for the super chat. I appreciate that. And of course, we cannot forget this, because I think if there was ever a real clear example of them laughing in our faces, it had to be this.
Classic, bougie, ratchet. Buckles on the jacket, it's elite shit. Na na na, oh na na na, oh na na na. Savage, yeah. Classic, bougie, ratchet.
And what's that? I see that comment. Wait. A sentence says they're not doctors; they're out of work performers hired. And but didn't stop at doctors or nurses. It also extended to like police doing the same thing as well. It was other professions. And insane. Police were out there dancing on TikTok while telling people who were minding their own business not to sit on park benches. Yes, it got that bad. We were subject to so much gaslighting. Makes me sick, Perto. Absolutely. It's so bizarre, Jack. So bizarre. It's mockery, Juliet. And absolutely P-takers, Kath. Absolutely. So, of course, I mentioned social distancing before. Social distancing in the UK, which began for lockdown, primarily enforced a 2-meter rule to reduce viral transmission, they told us. And again, going back to what I said at the start, if I wanted to go in, I'd love to. I would love the opportunity to say exactly what I want to say on this stream, but I know that it's really important that I'm able to show up here Monday and Friday and talk to you, and I don't want to be kicked off this platform, but I think people know where I'm coming from, right? I think people know where I'm coming from. So obviously that 2-meter rule included limiting public gatherings, closing businesses, implementing stay-at-home orders, and they were enforced via tiered restrictions and lockdowns. And later guidance was the 1 meter plus rule. Allowed reduced distance, 1 meter, if mitigation measures like face coverings or improved ventilation were in place. Ridiculous. And rules were broadcast like Big Brother through government press conferences and the Govt UK website. In fact, I have just put on Twitter. Thank you, Mr. Prinsby. Blessings to you too for that super chat. I've just put on X, and I sent to my patrons yesterday a recording that I did of, actually, I wonder if I can bring it on here, because this tells you the absolute draconian nature of what we were subject to. This was one of my local train stations. Let me just upload this, because I think it's a real good representation of what we were subjected to. Listen to how stark it is.
Stay home. Anyone can get it, and anyone can spread it. Coronavirus. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
Drumstick, you were reading a comment that just disappeared. Let me be clear here. If your comments are disappearing, it's absolutely nothing to do with me. I don't have moderators, and I certainly don't have time to be deleting comments while you were on my live stream. So that concerns me if people's comments are being deleted during this stream. So how dystopian do you want it? Indeed. Absolutely. Yes. No, I know you know, Drum. Absolutely. I'm just saying that to everybody. So PCR tests also absolute joke. You know, at one stage they tested a papaya and it was positive. That is a fact. PCR tests for detecting SARS-CoV-2 faced absolutely significant challenges, logistical challenges, time challenges, false positives, many false positives. There was issues with the resource intensity, sample limitations. And by October 2021, it was estimated that at least 43,000 people may have been given wrong PCR COVID test results in the UK. And that was according to the UK Health Security Agency. Even Carrie Mulligan, I think it was Carrie Mulligan, wasn't it, who invented the PCR test, said it wouldn't have been suitable for something like this. Would not have been suitable like this. I've got some lunatic in the chat. I love it. Carrie Mullis, thank you so much. Thank you for reminding me. Do you know what? It's so wonderful, isn't it, winding up people? And please, carry on, you people. It's only one or two. And these people are almost certainly government hired hands. Let them. It will improve the algorithm for us. All good, all good. But you in the chat, feel free to block these probably government shills who are in our live chat right now. Right now. Jack's load of it happened. Oh, but they didn't force anybody, said Humphrey. Humphrey, I know Humphrey is being sarcastic there, and that's because we were subject to so much coercion, right? And then there was the track and trace farce. Absolutely. Baroness Dido Harding. Yes, Carrie Mullis, that's it. Baroness Dido Harding, the Conservative peer, former Talk chief, led the NHS test and trace from its inception in May 2020 until April 2021. She was the executive chair of the NHS test and trace, separate from her roles in NHS improvement. Reports indicated that she continued to receive remuneration of approximately 60,000 to 65,000 per year for a role at NHS improvement. And there was big outrage about all of this, right? She was bringing in these experts and they were being paid daily rates of over 6,600. There's some sixes in there. And many others were on an average pay of 1,000 to 7,000 per day. And it was absolutely ridiculous. They set it up with a budget initially of 22 billion pounds, right? And then they increased it. And the total was 37 billion. And it was a failed track and trace system. In fact, Meg Hillier, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, just bear with me 2 secs, people. I just got to get rid of something. 2 seconds. I'll be there because I think sometimes it's really whoops, there we go. I'm there. Just bear with me, you beautiful people, you beautiful, beautiful people. I think you've all probably blocked the psychopath in the live chat, but we can see you, psycho. We can see you. Sad bots or sad shills, F off and go and cry in your dark rooms. Absolutely, we see you, you psycho shills, and may you receive everything that you are due. Right, so Meg Hillier, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, said the 22 billion for test and trace is about the annual budget for the Department for Transports. They spent all that, the Department of Transport, equivalent to the Department of Transport annual budget, right? And they spent all that. And what they were doing was, even after the test and trace, the track and trace, test and trace, whatever you want to call it, they still continued to pay consultants up to £1,000 a day. And Dido Harding, she completely defended it. She said, I'm not receiving a salary for leading the test and trace. You're receiving a salary for NHS executive. Sit down, woman, sit down. Oh, Frankie, I've probably not on here, actually. Might be on and somewhere else. But anyway, you know, psychos. And actually, I love it because it shows that I'm really, really stepping over the line here, that someone is kicking off so badly in the chat. And, but we love it. We love it. We love it. We love it. I can see it, but you can't, kids, for some reason. So anyway, that again, absolute farce. It was rates, you know, their mates getting sorted out. We know it. And of course, the rules did not apply to them. Important to remember, the rules did not apply to them. They were not afraid to break the rules. Why were they not afraid? Did they, in fact, know there was nothing to be scared of? Of course, this included the man. Thank you. Thank you for all your super chats. I really appreciate it. I will note at the end. Please make sure I note at the end, and thank you all. So this included the man who drew up the original modelling. Remember him, Professor Neil Ferguson, scientist at the Imperial College London. He was the advisor to the government, and he had been visited at home by his lover on at least 2 occasions in March and April 2020 at the so-called height of the pandemic. He resigned from his position on the 6th of May, admitting an error of judgment. Matt Hancock said at the time he was speechless at Ferguson's behavior. And that was before we discovered that Matt Hancock was having an affair and also breaking rules, right? So Matt Hancock, he knew the health secretary. That should have been the clue. When the health secretary was breaking the rules, he admitted to breaking social distancing rules after pictures emerged of him embracing his lover. Outrageous stuff. Yes, thank you for all your super chats. Absolutely outrageous stuff. And it's not the first time people in the public eye, from celebrities to ministers, were caught flouting those rules. There was the Johnson Partygate thing, which eventually, we were told, led to the resignation of Boris Johnson, but not at all. He'd outgrown his purpose. It was time to move him on. And then they needed somebody who knew more potentially about kind of like digital currency and everything. And eventually, there was kind of like, I think there was a madness with Liz Truss prior to that. Then they kind of, I think they brought him back. And then there was Rishi Sunak, who was very much in the digital ID mode. What am I looking for here? Partygate. Look at this. And they said that there's Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, his, at the time, closest aide, who also was said to have broken down lockdown rules. There's Matt Hancock in the background, you can see. And they're all getting together. They said that was a work event, but I see wine. I see wine on the tables. They knew the rules were BS. That's right. They knew before they set them and forced the rules onto the public anyway. And what about Starmer and the voice coach during lockdown in December? There's Starmer was caught in that whole Beergate thing. Do you remember that? Keir Starmer and Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, they were caught in Beergate. So what happened was there was this gathering in April 2021, and the investigation, popularly known in the tabloid press as Beergate, concluded that no COVID lockdown rules were broken because the event fell under an exemption for reasonably necessary work. This was a bottle of beer and a curry evening with colleagues at the office of an MP in Durham. And Durham Constabulary initially found no offence, right, but reopened the case following significant new information and pressure from Conservative MPs, right? And it was just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. They were all breaking the rules. They were all breaking the rules because they knew there was nothing to fear, right? The man closest to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for goodness sake, Dominic Cummings, PM's former chief aide, he caused outrage at the height of the first lockdown in March 2020. He travelled from London to Durham while suffering what we were told was suspected COVID symptoms. And there was immense pressure, including from Conservative MPs, but Boris Johnson refused to sack him because they were all up to the same thing. Cummings resigned later that year and has become something of a whistleblower, but I don't trust him. I don't trust him at all. Then there was Robert Jenrick, another loser Tory MP who was defected to Reform. He was then the Conservative Government Housing Secretary, and he visited his parents' home in Shropshire, 40 miles from his home in Herefordshire in April 2020. He said he just dropped off food and medication and did not enter the house. His behaviour was cleared by, guess who? The Prime Minister, whose spokesman said, we're confident that he complied with the social distancing rules. And so, you know, it tells you all you need to know. And in Scotland, quite famously, there was Margaret Ferrier. She was a former SNP MP at the time. She travelled from Scotland to London in September after apparently showing coronavirus symptoms, then back again after getting a positive test, a journey of 400 miles. She had the SNP whip removed and she apologised. She was charged with culpable and reckless conduct in February. She said that the virus made her act out of character and that she panicked. You're lying. You're all lying. And then, famously again, Dr. Catherine Calderwood, Scotland's chief medical officer, forced to quit her role after she was found to have twice visited her second home on the coast of Fife. The then leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Jackson Carlaw, said her stepping down had been the right course of action. There cannot be one rule for the bosses and another one for everyone else. Well, the only reason that there was because they knew. They knew, and many of us did. Many of us knew, but they knew. 100% they knew. And we were told that Boris Johnson resigned, as I say, because of the Partygate scandal. I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. And it was all kind of mad, all mad stuff. And a parliamentary privileges committee investigation had occurred into whether he'd misled Parliament over the lockdown party. It was described as a kangaroo court, but I don't frankly care. I just don't want these people around. I do not want these people around at all. He, as I say, he was taken out of the position because he'd done his job and they wanted to move him along. And I think, for me, aside from what they've done to us, like in terms of our physical health, the psychological impact on us is so great. It's so great. I think we are still counting the cost. I am fascinated by human psychology, which is why I took a psychology degree in my 40s. I realized it's in everything we do, how we interact with each other, how we all see things differently, depending on an assortment of factors such as nature and nurture and whether we were cherished or neglected as children and what people said to us, etc., etc. All of it lives with us. It makes us who we are. And our psychology massively contributes to that. And I am in no doubt whatsoever that we are the victims of a psychological attack. No doubt whatsoever. We are victims. We've been abused. We've been abused. All of us, any of us who were subject to these measures have been abused, whether people realize it or not. I still cannot believe that Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson are still walking around free. I just can't. I mean, it just tells us so much. And the UK COVID inquiry has been shown to be little more than a face-saving, narrative-solidifying farce where both Johnson and Hancock have been portrayed as naive and incompetent rather than corrupt, which is what they are. And, what just happened? I call them the comfortably dumb. And says Shug, let me just, there we go. And we're all changed by that time. But I think none more so than children. I was talking to someone yesterday whose sister had a baby in 2020. And he was talking about the impact it has had on that child. The child was essentially sort of isolated and kept away from socializing for about 2 years of its life. Awful, awful stuff. Awful stuff, people. We're all changed by it. What they did to us, what they did to children. Some people didn't survive this. UK lockdowns caused significant mental health deterioration, with at one point 49% of the population reporting anxiety or worry, and 1 in 10 experiencing suicidal thoughts. Young people, women, and those in lower socioeconomic groups were said to be disproportionately affected. And that is according to official records. But I would disagree. I think men were also very deeply impacted. I know people who took their own lives and they were male. It was terrible. They targeted people. It was a persistent distress that they subjected us to. The long-term impact, I believe, is incalculable at this stage. I think we are still paying for it. And the prevalence of suicide and suicidal thoughts was a major, major concern. And yet it was an absolute failure of the charities whose job it is to protect people, vulnerable people. The mental health charities, the charities like Samaritans, they push the government agenda. No one questioned it. These charities must be exposed for failing to protect people's mental health and psychological well-being. They were involved in the psychological abuse. They were gaslighters. I will never, ever again support any of these charities. The Mind charities, absolutely deplorable and disgraceful. Love says they're guilty of coercive control, gaslighting, and psychological abuse. Compliers are in a trauma bond with this corrupt cartel. Couldn't have said it better myself. The fearmongering was horrendous. MK Ultra. Absolutely. The fearmongering was horrendous. Remember the advertising. Advertising, also horrendous. Remember this one. Look him in the eyes, look her in the eyes. Terrible stuff, horrendous adverts. They alone were abusive. This was absolutely coercive. This was as I say, the social and psychological impact on us, I think we'll be evaluating long into the future. The panic and propaganda was very, very real. Let us not forget that we were primed to see in terms of lack right at the start when we had nationwide reports and scenes of shops running out of loo rolls. Did that happen in your country? Did it? Yes, thank you. All of you. Again, thank you for your super chats this morning. I really appreciate it. And I will acknowledge at the end of this stream. And so we saw all that, right? But there was something else going on that I, as a journalist, became acutely aware of, and it absolutely explained why we had all these establishment journos trotting out the same line. And that is, during C19, the UK government became the country's largest advertiser, significantly increasing its marketing budget to communicate these messages, right? What happened was the government spent over 184 million on C19 advertising, specifically in just 2020 alone. A specific 35 million was spent on a print media fund, including all digital and social media channels. Some analysis say that the total for the first year, including all of them brought together, print media, social media advertising, TV advertising, it was in excess of £350 million to the UK taxpayer. And again, that will be echoed all over the world. It is your tax money that has been hit with this. They used our money to scare us with lies. It's horrendous what they did to us. Abby wants her money back. Yes, I agree. We all do. Absolutely. But this explains the media complicity. The media were on message because their jobs depended on it. The government had become their wage supplier. And what was so ironic, was we suddenly had obese and overweight broadcasters like Nick Ferrari, Sheila Fogarty, Vanessa Feltz, Porky Piers Morgan telling us what was good for the public health. What a ruddy joke. C19 was and remains an absolute journalistic failure. They didn't challenge. They accepted wholeheartedly because their jobs depended on it. I lost my 8-year-long job at ITN for speaking out. I worked at ITN, which is the UK's biggest news provider. It provides news for 3 out of 5 terrestrial channels. It's a massive enterprise, is ITN. And I was there for 8 years as the contributing and consulting editor. And I lost my job because of what I was saying on social media and on an independent video platform. They said, you can't be doing this. This is a problem. And yes, this platform that I'm on right now, certainly on YouTube, faced criticism over its handling of what was called online disinformation. And in 2022, a number of fact-checking organizations, you know the ones I mean, the gatekeepers, they actually wrote to YouTube accusing YouTube of being one of the major conduits of online disinformation and misinformation worldwide. That's what they did. They wrote, they were like, oh, look at this. Sugar, I didn't realize I still had your, oh, what was this? African Rose said, I lost my job as a carer for not wearing a mask. Pretty horrendous stuff. Yes. I know, T2. I want my life and past friends back too. It was true what they said in the 90s. And again, what I said was with Susan. Oh, let me just take that off there. This was obviously the YouTube CEO. I thought that was a very fitting picture at the World Economic Forum. And you know, I wish no harm on anybody. Absolutely not. She stepped down a year later to focus on her health. And one has to question what could have caused her cancer. But again, doing it on this platform is not a sensible idea. But my viewers know what I'm thinking. And for those who don't, then please tell each other. Just do it, right? Because the censorship was intense. It was all around us. They came after us with force. Google, absolutely at the forefront of it. Media, television, print, radio. It was everywhere. And the thing is that they also kept telling us that everybody wants this. Everybody wants this jab. Everybody wants to be protected. Everyone wants to be safe. If everybody wants it, you don't need to have that level of brute force, coercion, blackmail. You don't need that. Absolutely, you don't. And again, I will never, ever, ever forget the complicity of journalists and people involved in the media, whether that is Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan was absolutely awful. Some of these people wanted us isolated from society. The broadcaster Andrew Neil actually wanted those who refused to take the jab isolated from society. You had crazy people like Esther Ranson, who wants us now to have, an assisted suicide act. Crazy people like Esther Ranson, who wanted people denied National Health Service care if they refused to take the jab. I will never forgive you. I will never forget you. And people like presenter Kate Garraway, I mean, UK, what the hell happened? Good Morning Britain, major pushers, right? Major pushers. Piers Morgan was on that show. Susanna Reid. I'm going to get to them in a minute because that was where they had the first jab. And there was Kate Garraway. She was a main character in all of this. And we were told that her husband, Derek, so her husband, Derek, was a former kind of Labour spin doctor, New Labour, a former colleague of Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson. And he became a high profile C19 patient and later died. And Kate Garraway became like the nation's the nation's grieving widow while he was sick. And she was just rammed down our throat. And she was very well paid on Good Morning Britain. And I remember once when she kept going on about money, how much it was all costing her and everything. And Piers Morgan suggested that she should be given like a free car and all this kind of stuff. Up yours, and then some more. Up yours, and then some more. And can you also remember the stupidity they expected us to take? Look at this image, right? This was Holly and Phil on Good Morning. Look at this madness. Look at this madness. And what was so mad about this? I worked with both those numpties. What was so mad about this was after they did that on the same day, they went to Wimbledon in the afternoon. They sat next to each other. This was all a performance. And I am so delighted what happened eventually to these two because they didn't deserve any better, right? So Phil was found to have had inappropriate relations with a significantly junior member of staff. And we don't know when that started. So I'm always loath to call it a relationship. Although he says it was legal. And then Holly, absolutely complicit in it all. Both of them, they've essentially kind of been hounded from TV, although I know that Holly is attempting to come back and Philip attempted to come back, but they were absolutely involved in it. And Mr. Law, or Mr. L.A. Williams UK is reminding me about the UK 77th Brigade military psyop. Absolutely spot on right, again to do with censorship. And they targeted me. I discovered from a subject access request that I had been kind of marked out as someone who was problematic during the narrative, and they had followed me and they had targeted me in my work. And that, again, was funded by the British taxpayer. And honestly, from very early on, I knew that the media was going to be absolutely complicit because I was a freelance journalist. And one of the shows that I worked on was the Stephen Nolan show on, what was that? BBC Radio 5 Live. So it was a BBC radio channel. And I was on his show throughout from January. And I saw how media panic started. Every week, Stephen Nolan would absolutely ramp up the fear and pressure. It was hard not to take part in that and become part of that media circus. And I repeatedly asked for calm and caution. No one cared. It was like people wanted to be scared. And Stephen Nolan was a major pusher. And again, at the time before he'd gone on his diet, he was significantly obese and yet seemed to think he was some sort of authority on public health. A lot of these obese people did. It was farcical. And each week on the Stephen Nolan show would be a further horrific intended new measure for us to contemplate and debate. Should we stay home to save granny? Should elderly people not be allowed to socialize? Awful stuff that was being contemplated by our mainstream media and their who handlers. But perhaps one of the most egregious things to happen, and I cannot play the video, even though I would love to, involved this man, Laughing Matt Hancock, the health secretary. And the reason I can't play it is because the last time that I attempted to play an ITV video, it launched an immediate strike on me. And until I removed it, YouTube would not let me play the video. So I'm not going to attempt to play the ITV video. But at the end of the stream, I will put a link into it so you can see this man laughing. So he was the health secretary. Okay. And this was a broadcast on Good Morning Britain on the morning of December the 8th, 2020. They, Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid were interviewing the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. And the context was that it was the first jabs of people. Margaret Keenan and a man called William Shakespeare. I'm really not kidding, kids. I'm not kidding. And this were, we were told, the first man and woman to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Their words, not mine. I very rarely call it a vaccine. And Bill Shakespeare later died 5 months later at University Hospital Coventry, the same hospital where he received his first jab, but they were very quick to say this had nothing to do with the jab. I can't trace what's happened to Margaret Keenan. I don't know whether she's still alive or not. But what I do know, here they are, just so you can remember them. What I do know, absolutely, categorically, unquestionably, is Matt Hancock laughed as these people were receiving this mRNA jab. He was laughing. And you can see that from the video. I've clipped what I consider probably some of the better pictures that capture it, but he was absolutely laughing. And what was really awful, no gloves on, somebody's pointing out. Absolutely. Here we go. Let's just go back to that again. There you go. Absolutely. And fake. Absolutely. How many jokers are there in a deck of cards? I've no idea. Is it 4? I don't know what that's got to do with anything, but it might have something to do with something. It really might. It was original Shakespeare who wrote "All the world is a stage." Thank you for pointing that out. Toilet roll holder. Presumably yours is never empty. And then, yes, of course, the jab nurse. I mean, loads of that stuff happened, right? Who fainted, although they said that she survived. Where is she, though? Where is she, though? I cannot even stand to look at him. Absolutely disgusting. And what was worse is, do you remember Piers Morgan saying, "You're getting really emotional there, aren't you, Matt?" And there's like this fake empathy from Morgan and Reid. They are complicit. They're all complicit in the lie. They're all complicit in the lie. Yes, they're great comment. Absolutely, Sentinel. Great quote to remember that. Absolutely. So they are all complicit in the lie. And so that was December 2020 when the first, we were told, COVID vaccine was approved, began being deployed across the UK in early December. And Good Morning Britain absolutely is responsible for what happened to people after that. I don't care. They absolutely are, unquestionably. And I hold, people can say, but we didn't know we were all caught in the same thing. Yeah, but the job of a journalist is not to just accept blindly, it's to actually ask questions. Do we need this? Is this any good for us? How has this been tested? Morgan, Reid, all of those hired hands did none of the sort. They just accepted it fulsomely. Trinity, great comment. I agree with you. I think more people have woken up because of this, though. Yes. And I think that is the silver lining. Yes, Abby, the comedian that collapsed after joking about the jab. So much stuff out there. Absolutely. And the thing is, right, so going back to what I said earlier about what Headley Rees had said to me. So the UK was the first country to do that rollout. And in early 2021, its vaccination program was one of the fastest in the world. By August 2021, we were told more than 75% of adults in the UK were fully vaccinated against C19. They told us that everyone wanted it. And as with the supplies at the start, right, they told us there was a shortage, and that was a sales ruse to make people want it desperately. And same with like PPE and masks and everything else. But the fact is, the take-up was not what they wanted it to be. They wouldn't have needed all the coercion, blackmail, bribery, threats, mandated laws. They wouldn't have needed any of that. mRNA, I got to be careful here, but new technology, right? COVID was the mRNA Trojan Horse. Absolutely. It's not a vaccine in the traditional sense. Lots said about them, but little I can say here. Many people I have talked with have a problem with it. Many, many, many people. And again, I refer back to Headley Rees, who told me that the UK was the test bed for mRNA technology. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine was the first. The UK was the first to approve the Pfizer vaccine. And mRNA technology uses synthetic messenger RNA. The idea is it instructs cells to produce specific proteins. It triggers an immune response to fight diseases. This is what they tell us, without using live virus components. There's so much more to it. Greater medical minds than myself have analysed what is in that, and it's really problematic. And somebody had asked earlier what is happening in the Netherlands with the court case. Well, we talked about that at the start of the week. Fiona Rose Diamond joined us because there is a court case which has been going on since 2022 to do with the mRNA jabs. But COVID was the Trojan horse to bring them forward, because ultimately mRNA is a whole lot cheaper to produce than traditional vaccines. Significantly cheaper, faster, pile them high, requires lower capital, lower labor costs. There's a higher initial material cost, but they gain that back very quickly. And bear in mind, vaccines, they can only stay on the market for a certain period of time. They have to be tested. It takes a long period of time, but not with mRNA. Awful stuff. Awful stuff. The software of life. What a comment. And I mean, there were lots of reasons why they wanted to push it through, but the UK was not alone in that, obviously. Donald Trump, Operation Warp Speed. Should have been Operation Warped, frankly, and he still hasn't changed his thinking. On March the 10th, 2021, he was the 45th president of the United States, and he issued a statement saying, "I hope everyone remembers when they're getting the COVID-19, often referred to as the China virus vaccine, that if I wasn't president, you wouldn't be getting that beautiful shot for 5 years at best and probably wouldn't be getting it at all. I hope everyone remembers." Yes, Donald. Along with you being someone who is alleged a 13-year-old bit the tip of your you-know-what, I remember you as being the father of the vaccine and Operation Warp Speed, and I will never forget. And furthermore, I believe karma will never forget. This was experimental. Why do you think the British government indemnified the pharma giants? Do you remember that? The British government provided legal protection to COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers. It wasn't a complete blanket immunity, but it might as well have been, right? It might as well have been. And what happened was the government amended the Human Medicines Regulations 2012 to extend existing immunity from civil liability to include the companies who were producing the vaccines. AstraZeneca, Pfizer, the Oxford jab, which I think was the AstraZeneca one, wasn't it? Somebody remind me. Don't get me started on the HPV vax, Melon. I've covered that in my film, The Business of Cancer, which was removed by YouTube, by the way. But yes, I get you. I get you. Awful stuff. Donnie Darko says sail away. I agree. And so they had this immunity, this incredible immunity. And this was in addition to legislative immunity. The government entered into specific indemnity agreements with AstraZeneca and Pfizer. And so it essentially meant that if anything were to happen to anybody as a consequence of being given this mRNA, then the companies would not be responsible. That's what happened. AZ was the Oxford jab. Thank you, Sean. Yes, I thought so. Did I get that right? Yeah, that's what happened. Immunity. Question. How to tell that somebody is not entirely confident in their product? Give them immunity. Give them immunity. And then was it 75 years until we could see the records to do with Pfizer? Absolutely insane stuff. And again, if people really wanted it, why did they need to incentivize so much? Do you remember the insane incentives that were going on around it? I'm sure there were insane incentives all around the world, right? And again, as I say, if it was so good, why did they need to do this? Why did they need to threaten, coerce, blackmail, force, and even mandate people? So what we had was things like, for example, Krispy Kreme donut people famously offered one free glazed donut every day for the rest of the year to anyone with proof of vaccination. In China, we heard that some local governments offered vaccinated seniors up to 2.5 kilograms of free eggs as a reward. In Romania, citizens were rewarded with a barbecued sausage sandwich after receiving their dose. In rural areas of Thailand and the Philippines, local authorities held monthly raffles where vaccinated residents could win a live cow. Then there was joints for jabs. Anybody remember that? Marijuana dispensaries and activist groups in the US, like in states like Washington, Michigan, New York, offered free pre-rolled joints to vaccinated adults. Goldsmiths in India teamed up to give women free gold nose pins and men hand blenders for getting vaccinated. An Illinois vaccination site offered 100 free target rounds at a local shooting complex. A strip club in Las Vegas provided platinum membership, free bottles and dances from vaccinated entertainers for those jabbed on the site. Remember, these jabbers were going into nightclubs. It's absolutely insane. New York was allowing museum selfies. So at the American Museum of Natural History, you could take a selfie under the 94-foot blue whale, which was sporting its own giant bandage. Ridiculous stuff. Free McDonald's, free ice creams, free. Mel's can't remember which country offered blowjobs, but someone did. Betcha. Don't talk to me about jabbing babies. I will just get so furious. But I take your point. I'm not furious with you. Whoever brought that up, I'm not furious with you. I'm still furious that any of this was allowed. But of course, the big pharma winners, right? Big pharma winners. Pfizer generated at minimum roughly $74 billion in direct revenue from its COVID-19 vaccine during 2021 and 2022 alone. And that's huge, right? And that continued to generate. It continued to generate throughout 2023 and 2024. And the question is, why isn't it now continuing to generate? Did it all just stop? How funny that, right? And they made a killing. Literally, they made a killing. And AstraZeneca, for example, 2021 performance sales reached, for this specifically, C19, reached 3.9 billion, representing a significant portion of the company's revenue growth that year. And AZ announced in late 2021 that it would begin making a modest profit on new orders. Shut the F up. And when these people, I loathe them, I detest them, I deplore them, but it was never just about money, but money was very, very useful as well. Okay, it was never, ever about money. And it is a fact, again, fact checkers, that some people were irreparably harmed by the mRNA. And I don't believe we know the half of it yet. Certainly, we saw an increase in sports people collapsing on pitches. They did admit that there was a link to from the jab and myocarditis. Myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle, usually caused, we're told, by infections that can weaken the heart and reduce everything that it does, its entire function, the pumping ability. It will cause chest pains, fatigue. It can lead to serious complications, including heart failure. Okay. And that is an absolute reality. And there has been a documented increase in myocarditis cases compared to pre-COVID-19 levels. And you know, primarily driven by the mRNA. Absolute fact. But they also want to tell us, researchers say, that the risk of developing myocarditis is significantly higher after a natural C19 infection than after vaccination. Do you believe them? Well, we know, as I say, that some people were irreparably harmed and even killed. That is a reality. I talked with numerous doctors, including cancer specialists, who talked about an increase in cancer, about turbo cancer. Alex Mitchell was one of the very first people to actually receive a compensation for what happened to him. Really bad stuff, what happened to him, right? He took the jab, 58-year-old. I think he was a former scaffolder from Scotland. I've interviewed Alex a number of times. Great guy. But took the jab, because he believed it was his civic duty, right? Because that was what the coercion was. And he was one of the first individuals to receive a payment through the UK's vaccine damage payment scheme for a severe adverse reaction to the AZ jab. And they set the ceiling for the vaccine damage scheme at £120,000. Well, that's nothing to somebody who's had their leg amputated and they can no longer go to work. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. But it also killed people. Lisa Shaw, BBC presenter, was one example. Jack Hearn died in June 2021 after developing blood clots following the jab. Marina Waldron died in March 2021 from a heart attack and brain hemorrhage. There's more. It's just loads. This is a very, very real thing. And I am sorry to every single person out there who has been impacted by this. We must never forget. We must never, ever, ever, ever forget. Ever. And the vaccine damage scheme should by its very existence tell people that vaccine damage is a very real thing. And two, the ceiling should be lifted. And I don't think it has been yet, but it should be. What's going on in the comments there? Yes, Amanda, they took the jab, got injured and got ignored. Absolutely, they did. And the irony of it, of course, was that people like Alex and sorry, I've forgotten the other guy in Scotland. Please forgive me. But he also confronted Rishi Sunak. But these people were ignored and they actually ended up only getting support from people like me who were opposed to it all in the first place. It was so ironic. They were bringing more and more. I don't know the answer to that, Happy Camper. They were certainly allowing people still to flood into the UK while saying, this is a real problem, right? John Watt, thank you. Thank you so much. I met John before. I met him when I did a gig in Edinburgh. But yes, John Watt, again, was damaged by the jab as well. Terrible stuff. And again, Alex, like John, had to turn to people like me for support because the people who had pushed it, the Piers Morgans and the Nick Ferraris, they weren't interested in the vaccine damaged. You are so welcome, Vaccine Injury Scott. You are so welcome. Sorry to hear all of it. And in the UK, I'm taking you back again, right? We were told a third wave of daily infections began in July 2021 due to the arrival and rapid spread of the Delta variant. And remember, that year we also had the Omicron. They kept having new names for it. Do you remember? And it got so bad, right, that it was outdoor. Like there were venues, the entertainment, gigs, and they were not allowing people in unless they could show full proof of vaccination. And we thought the expression "show me your papers" could never happen here, but that was happening. And again, I talked to lots of people during that period, including undertakers, and the difference between dying with COVID and dying of COVID is what really needs to be examined and studied, because we didn't ever get real figures. We didn't ever get real figures. Now, to be clear, some people denied that the whole thing never existed. But again, to do this on YouTube is suicide for my channel if I go down that road, right? So I hope you understand that. And they were constantly massaging the figures. And none of it made a lot of sense. They had this 28-day rule where daily figures often counted deaths of anyone who died within 28 days of a first positive laboratory confirmed test. And the Foo Fighters, listen, the Foo Fighters, who's that? NCP, along with many other people, were absolute disappointment. These people, Rage Against the Machine, do me a favor. They're all part of the machine. It's disgusting what they did. It was experimental, George. Absolutely it was. We were gaslighted all the time. Shin says she's late, but can we do better than 250 likes? Digital health passport, says Health Freedom UK. Indeed. Indeed. And I wonder if I can just bring in this video of this US, because this tells us all we need to know. This tells us exactly what we need to know about the death rates, right? Let me just see if I can bring it in. I hope I can. And again, here we go. Have a listen. This is about death certificates. And this was in the US, but the same applied in the UK and probably all over the world. Oh, is it not playing? That's annoying. But okay, you can at least, the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. That means that if you're in a hospice and had already been given a few weeks to live and the jab, and then you were also found to have COVID, we would have counted that. It means technically, even if you died of clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. Everyone who is listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that was the cause of the death. And the same applied in the UK. Same applied. There was a lot of jiggery pokery that was going on. The stuff, I remember interviewing John O'Looney, an undertaker, and the stuff that he was talking about that he had never seen before in terms of the clots and these people. Horrendous stuff has been done to us, people. I don't think we even know the half, but we are catching up fast. And we must never, ever, ever forget the major world stage pushers. Ever, ever, ever. Here we have Anthony Fauci, right? Dr. Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, these people, major pushers. And of course, there were obviously like Tedros, Ghebreyesus from WHO, major pusher as well. But these two were major pushers, and it was quite obscene. And again, never, ever, ever forget. And they turned into like these victim modes. Let me just have a drink. DJ Markson says lack of vitamin D had a lot to do with it. Yeah, because we were told to stay inside, right? So absolute mad stuff. And but yes, never forget Bill Gates, never forget Anthony Fauci. Bill Gates said that we needed 7 billion people jabbed. That's what Bill Gates said. Well, I know that there are more in the world, but at one stage it was believed that there were 7 billion people in the world. And so I wrote to Bill Gates and said, can you just confirm that you've said 7 billion people need to be jabbed? Are you saying that needs to be mandated? And they didn't respond. They didn't confirm nor deny. But if they'd have had their way, they would have mandated it for everybody. 100%. 100%. And somebody referred to the Foo Fighters. Well, there was loads of people who disappointed me. I used to love Pink as one example. She was a major pusher. I also used to love Dolly Parton, but she gave money, major pusher. There's loads of other people. Remember Ariana Grande and James Corden? They did that sort of semi-advertising. Elton John, Liz Hurley, Stephen Fry, all these people betrayed us. They all betrayed us. That is a reality. Who was one of the biggest disappointments for you people? Who were Pink is okay, I got you. Who were the disappointments? In a sense, well, is that somebody that I don't know? Tiz, I can't pronounce your name, but Jolene, vaccine. Rachel really hopes Dolly was just naive. Oh, Colin was disappointed by Brian May. Yeah, these musicians. Who was Mark Lanigan? Dave Grohl. Yeah, absolutely. I'll never forget. I bloody have a daily reminder now. I do feel betrayed, says Jilly. I've got you. I was very disappointed with the lack of protest music, also drumstick, because wasn't that the whole, like, I'm a former music journalist, and I was so disappointed that some of the people who had stood up against world injustices didn't stand up against this. Awful stuff. Rage Against the Machine. They're not against the system, though, are they? They are all tools of Satan. It says is that Twitwoo? I think so. Punk. Oh, right. No, something else. But yeah, they were all in on it, of course. And there were all these agendas that were taking place. Remember the Build Back Better, right? All in a line with Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. And we had Charles, who apparently had COVID, and I ended up appearing on radio because it was at the point when it was quite early on, and we were told that nobody should move, and he moved from one country to another. He went from England to Scotland, even with it, because he knew. They knew. Build Back Better, remember, Prince Charles at the time. Major pushers. Never forgive, never forget. And also never forgive, never forget that we are in a financial crisis now because of the amount of money they doled out to people to incentivize, to blackmail and bribe them. The UK government provided unprecedented financial support to individuals and businesses during that period. Total spending was estimated at between 310 billion and 410 billion. That was dishy-rishy. This included direct wage subsidies, grants for the self-employed, but a lot of it was a crock. I knew people who were being paid furlough at Heathrow Airport, and when it ended, they were just sacked. They got rid of them. So these big corporate businesses were taking advantage of it. There were loads of people, very, very wealthy people. Remember the Beckhams? I think Victoria Beckham, she did the same thing, didn't she? Wealthy people were doing it. Richard Branson, absolutely. Awful stuff. Yes, Reba, they got us to repeat things endlessly, didn't they? Absolutely they did. And that is psychological programming. But yeah, a load of money was paid out. And the thing is, you didn't actually have to pay back those support measures, right? There was loads of stuff, bounce back loans. This cost us a fortune. This cost us an absolute fortune. There were like kickstart schemes, test and trace support payments, a £500 payment for those on low incomes who were required to self-isolate. And while none of this money was apparently repayable, unless there were overpayments or people received them that they were not entitled to, all grants were taxable and they needed to be reported on self-assessment tax returns. But billions was spent on this. And I've said this before. There were people, very middle-class people in my street who spent that money that they got from the government, my money, taxpayer money, to build extensions, loft extensions. That was what was happening. Fishy-rishy, says Alien. Jolie Mitchell. How sad. Michael Caine. Oh, my God. But no money for waspy women or winter fuel payments. Absolutely. And the opportunists who cashed in. Right, the VIP lane, do you remember that? That was a high priority channel that allowed ministers and MPs to refer politically connected firms for personal protective equipment, PPE contracts. Firms in this lane were 10 times more likely to win contracts. They wasted billions on PPE, by the way. The Department of Health and Social Care wrote off billions of pounds spent on PPE that was either defective, overordered, or did not meet NHS standards. And one of those people who was involved in that was the Conservative peer, Baroness Michelle Mone. Her and her husband, Doug Barrowman, are among two of the most prominent figures accused of cashing in during that period through lucrative PPE contracts. And they initially denied involvement. They later admitted that Barrowman led the consortium that set up PPE MedPro, making over 60 million in profit, with 29 million placed in an offshore trust for the benefit of Michelle Mone and her children. Nice work if you can get it. Why isn't she banged up? What happened? Can somebody explain to me why these people are still walking around? I don't understand. I just don't understand it. And do anybody remember when Matt Hancock sorted out his landlord mate who had contacted him via WhatsApp? I mean, Alex Bourne at the appropriately named Cock Inn in Thurlow, Suffolk, a pub near Hancock's former constituency home. He'd previously manufactured plastic cups and takeaway boxes, and suddenly he was involved in supplying tens of millions of medical-grade vials for NHS COVID-19 tests. The deal was worth approximately £40 million. He sent Matt Hancock a WhatsApp message offering his services, for goodness sake. Don't make me mayor of London, Shin. I couldn't do it. I hate politics, mostly because I hate politicians. Yes, I'm sorry about that. Jeannie is so embarrassed that she's Scottish. I'm sorry about that. But, you know, a-holes come in all shapes and sizes, all nationalities. It was an absolute rip-off. Bourne, by the way, insisted that he made zero profit out of all of those millions. And don't be expecting answers from the COVID inquiry, not that my very savvy viewers would. The UK COVID-19 inquiry, chaired by Baroness Heather Hallett, has concluded public hearings as of 5th of March this year. This statutory inquiry has examined the UK's preparedness, response, and the pandemic impact to learn lessons for the future. It's none of the sort. It is a saving face exercise that solidifies a narrative. It is to make sure that people like Johnson and Hancock and Zawi and all of them are not held responsible. And Module 1 was published in July 2024. It found the UK prepared for the wrong pandemic. Flu rather than coronavirus, apparently. Module 2, published on the 20th of November 2025, concluded that the UK's response was too little too late. And that's the thing, is they want to put it down to, this was incompetence. Nobody knew. I mean, Peter is reminding me of the Captain Tom Morsham. Yes, Peter, same thing. Cash in. Look how his family treated that. I've done a video about Captain Tom Moore, and actually, thank you for reminding me of that, Peter. And I'll put a link in the description about that. But the COVID inquiry. So essentially, they want us to believe that the ministers were just incompetent. They didn't know. They were caught off guard. Hi, Renat. Hello. How are you? That's what they wanted us to believe. We have upcoming reports coming, Module 3, scheduled for 19th of March, which is healthcare systems. Then we have one scheduled for 16th of April this year about vaccines and therapeutics. And then there's another one expected in summer about the procurement. And then there's another one expected later this year for the care sector. There's a real failure of the inquiry to look at the psychological damage, what was done to us, the coercion, the blackmail, the bribery, all of that stuff. And by the way, this is just the UK inquiry. Scotland has its own. Again, down to devolution. Other countries within the UK have their own inquiries, but the UK inquiry, as it's called, as of March, so as of now, 2026, it's cost us just over £200 million. And there's an additional 100 million, which is spent by government departments on evidence production. So £300 million. Baroness Haller has urged the public to push for changes. She recommends to ensure the UK is better prepared for future threats. Well, first thing we need to do is reintroduce stocks into every village and every town so we can put these people in stock so that everybody can see who is responsible for it. And don't forget, there was, during this COVID inquiry, we've had Hancock there and Boris Johnson. And then there was this admission, wasn't there, that Matt Hancock had sent hundreds of thousands of WhatsApp messages. And it was Isabel Oakeshott, again, another absolute establishment hack, the partner of Richard Tice of Reform, patriots who live in Dubai. And she was the one who essentially revealed some of these, but she sat on them for the longest time because that's what these people do. But essentially, there were a lot of WhatsApp messages that was talking about kind of like ramping up fear and clearly showed us, excuse me, I just had to clean out my ear live on air. Do you like that, Lenti? I think we need to bring back stocks. 666, I see in there. Frank says, do you think any of these celebs also fell for the BS? I think some of them did, but I don't think that's good enough because I'm not a doctor, right? And I wasn't out there promoting it, but I was asking questions. So if you're actually promoting it, the very least you can do is your due diligence, right? So, but I certainly can't forgive doctors. Don't expect me to forgive any doctor who was involved in this. And I don't care if they think they're at the forefront now of the freedom campaign. I don't forgive you. And I definitely don't forget. So just to say about that UK COVID inquiry and the WhatsApp messages, and we just saw that through those WhatsApp messages that we were duped, although many of us weren't because we were awake to it. They did, they had WhatsApp messages about frightening the pants off everyone and how they were going to do it and about deploying new information when they came up with the new Alpha Kent variant, frighten the pants off everyone. Do you remember that? All of that sort of stuff, that was all disclosed. Yes, Senton. Exactly, and more. That was all disclosed. Mark said we need to stop calling MPs honourable. We absolutely do. These are dishonourable people. Absolutely. They were bringing more. I don't know the answer to that, Happy Camper. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's very possible that more were being brought into the country simply because they left the borders open, didn't they? So obviously we had the censorship, we had the self-censorship. It was absolutely awful. The UK was bad, but Canada under Trudeau was awful. Absolutely insane. Canadian cousins, our hearts went out to you. Do you remember all the attacks on these people? Reba, you're very welcome. I am sorry it's such a triggering episode, but we must never forget. And we must also never forget the transference of wealth that took place. C19 was widely disruptive to the economy of the United Kingdom, with most sectors and workforces adversely affected, small businesses closing, just horrendously so in the last 6 years. And temporary shutdowns became permanent. Some people who were furloughed were later made redundant, as I say. But the big businesses, the global corporate businesses, the type of people who rock up to the inauguration of the President of the United States, they did exceptionally well. So Amazon, as one example, they just as early as 2021, they had already tripled their profits from the previous year. And Amazon, so what happened was that, and that's their net income. That's not their gross. That's after tax, right? Their net income had tripled in 2021 more than the previous year, because as the whole thing went on, the lockdown went on, we were just more and more deliveries, more and more shops, small shops were closing. Initially at the top of our road, we had all small shops that were open and we were using those. But as the time went on, people couldn't afford it anymore. It was awful. Absolutely awful. No worries, Jeannie. Got to be done. Absolutely got to be done. So yeah, Amazon made a massive profit because in the first quarter of 2021, they reported $8.1 billion in profit. And the previous year, their profit was $2.5 billion. That's nearly $6 billion profit for Amazon. So we know it was one of the greatest transferences of wealth in our lifetime. And generally, the Western world was in lockstep about C19. Same alarming and exaggerated headlines always round, same totalitarian methods. But some countries refused to go along with the rest. Sweden was one of them, was held up as an example. It largely rejected mandatory lockdowns, instead relying on voluntary cooperation, personal responsibility. Most other nations were enforcing stay-at-home orders, business closures. Sweden kept its society open, relatively open, and it drew international criticism. Of course it would, because all of these global shills are like, why are they not doing what we're doing? They're making us look bad. And Sweden was all about minimal face mask recommendations. They said that businesses needed to continue. Shops, restaurants, gyms, bars remained open. But they also, very sadly, showed a failure to protect their elderly. And there was, again, a problem with care home residents. What were they doing all around the world with care home residents? And awful stuff. And you know what? Over the full 3-year period to do with Sweden's excess mortality rate was among the lowest in Europe, comparable to or even lower than many countries that had implemented strict lockdown. So what did that tell us? Canadian truckers in prison for mischief and still being persecuted. Absolutely. And we were aligned with them, Derek. Absolutely, we were. And so, you know, Sweden was a problem for the globalist shills. And again, as I said, I interviewed so many great people during this period, from concerned doctors to, well, funeral directors and more. There were also opportunists who came together, right? It was a fake new dawn for the truther community in many respects, because it turned out that while some people woke up to the madness of C19 because it directly affected them, they went back to sleep over other international issues such as Russia, Ukraine, Israel, etc. But there were many great gatherings, and I was at the Unite for Freedom. I was at a few of them, actually, but this was, I think, one of the first main ones. The Unite for Freedom was held in Trafalgar Square, and I posted this video on Twitter, as it was then known. I got death threats. People were like, I hope you end through COVID and everything. Anyway, this is what I said, because you know me, I don't give a... It's Saturday. I'm in Trafalgar Square. It's only just after 11 o'clock, and we're here for Unite for Freedom. People are coming today to make their voices heard against mandatory vaccinations, mandatory masks, mandatory anything really. No more lockdowns, no more second wave business. And we're going to be here, we're filming right now. As you can see, it's only about just gone 10 past 11. People are already gathering. I think it's going to be packed here, so try and get here if you can. And let's raise our voices all together. See you later. So just for that simple video in August, I think it was August 7th or something, I was getting death threats, just awful stuff. Because the problem is that by that point, the state no longer needed to come out and rail against us, because the people turned on us. People were turning on each other. It was the ultimate divide and conquer. Oh, Mark, did you just see a comment vanish? Really? Wow. Yes, Mels, I'm so proud to be part of those days. Absolutely. And I love you too, Shin. Absolutely. 77th Brigades were behind the threats. Yes, they were. And so we have to ask, could it all happen again? Yes, and it already is. They tried numerous others after it, including monkeypox. Remember that? There is always a new psyop on the agenda, always willing hands to help carry it out, whether that is Piers Morgan or Jeremy Vine or Dr. Hilary Jones. So people have to beware, and that is why I cannot forget and I cannot forgive. What was done to us was more than a psychological operation. This was an all-out attack on every area of our lives and livelihoods. Who can we hold to account? Lives have been unnecessarily lost. Small businesses have folded, leaving people in tremendous debt. Cost of living is sky high. Babies born during lockdown have had their natural foundations interfered with. Children are damaged by the psychological impact of social distancing, masks, and more. People still have to be held accountable, even if they were only the willing helpers. And in that, I include all of the world leaders who took part in it. And Patrick Vallance, horrible individual, now being an absolute beast when it comes to animals, because he, as the science minister, is now involved in he was involved in discussions to do with the testing of animals, even though Labour government claimed that they were going to phase out animal testing. People like Patrick Vallance, they don't like animals any more than they like humans. I detest people like him. There is something, much info out there now. I'm not sure. The abused locked up with their abusers, the poor dogs. Absolutely. Will we ever see justice, says Markson. Ultimately, I think we will. I don't believe anybody. I believe in karma. I don't believe anybody can escape having done these sort of things. I just simply don't. And that's why Charlie Mullins, a ridiculous human being. Do you remember him? The plumber, the plumber from, can't remember, Southwest London. What was it? I'm sure somebody will remind me. But he was absolutely ridiculous. Again, absolute. Who'd ever want to work for people like that? Outrageous, deceitful. All the garbage revealed. Who is safe to trust in your voting? Well, I mean, is there anybody? Pimlico, thank you, kids. Thank you so much. 11:11 we're up to. And truth is coming to us, right? But the reality is the complicity runs deep and still exists. And the reason I know it still exists, because we covered Operation Tala the other week. Operation Tala, fine people who have done tremendous research. Operation Tala was a police initiative where police around the UK and certainly in England and Wales were told not to accept vaccine injury complaints. Why isn't there widespread outrage that more is not being done to do with Operation Tala? I don't understand. What am I missing here? Fake Rod, absolutely. Or Rod, as they used to call him. We all so much to say on this. Yes, the three fearmongering generals. Never forgive, never forget. Pimlico Plonker. Yes, absolutely. So who benefited? Well, as we know, big global corporations such as Amazon, those pushing for a digital ID and cashless society. The COVID inquiry will tell us that they didn't know, that it was confusion, even incompetence. What it won't tell us that this was complicity, but we know. We know, and that's important. Each one teach one. Even if you in the middle of it and you talk to somebody at the checkout in a supermarket or whatever, you know, just whatever, raise it up. You may never see that person ever again. And 6 years since we had COVID, what did you think about that? What? And just go off on one. And I want to refer to a tweet that was sent to me this morning from Leap of Truth. COVID was a psychological warfare on the masses to prepare them for the carnage that is planned to follow for the rest of the decade. And the central plot to it all is control. Spot on, spot on, spot on. Global agendas made big gains during this period of time. And we, as a people, we are forever changed by what they did to us. What they did to us. Never forgive, never forget. Ever, 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 never. And I just want to thank you all for being here. As I say, I couldn't hope to cover everything that happened all over the world during that period, but I hope that I've given a big enough overview of what took place, because these people are bad. They're disgusting. They are shameless, and they've harmed us. That is the reality. And And thank you, as ever, for being here with us today. And thank you to the people on the super chat. Thank you to Kath Hutton. Thank you to Mr. Prinsbeat. Thank you to Sarah Higgerson. Thank you to Mr. L.A. Williams, UK War Machine, who has been very generous this morning, given me several super chats. Thank you so much. Carrie Mullis, PCR died same week as Epstein in 2019. Is that right? Shudder. I just went kind of shivery. And locked up for a 99.98 survival rate. Outrageous stuff. Thank you, James Bond. Well, just thank you all. Sign the petition. What's that? The art of the insult is what makes us British. He wants us to sign a petition. If you send me the link, I'll pop it in the description. They are now telling us everyone wants digital ID, says Marilyn. Again, thank you all for your super chat. Thank you to Swiss Miss. Thank you, Abby Creates, who wants me to do a deep dive into the British Heart Foundation for staying silent. Again, complicity, total complicity, just like the mental health charities, right? Just the same thing. Thank you, Trinity. I will never, ever forget. And thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you to everybody who supports this platform, my channel. I truly appreciate you. And I need to go and kind of calm myself now, because I'm so mad going over all of this, right? Going over all of this. It really hurts my heart, and not in a myocarditis type of way. It really hurts my heart what we've been subjected to, the losses that have happened to us. And so I have to believe in a higher power that will ultimately sort all of this. You're very welcome. Thank you all for being here, everybody. And I don't think I've forgotten anything. I hope I haven't, but I will see you on Monday. And I'm going to end with what Alien Big Cat says, and that is, we must win. We must indeed. Take good care of yourself, everybody. I love you lots. Have a great weekend. And yeah, never again. Never forget, never forgive, never again. Take care. See you Monday.